Welcome to the Back to the Bricks podcast, a new podcast about sports, faith, and culture. I'm Justin.
And I'm Nick, close friends turned mid-major rivals. Join us as we venture back to the bricks. Welcome back to the bricks. We are coming back at you after a week off, and Justin, I just want to let you know off the bat that we felt like last week with everything going on in the United States and just all the voices that were being displayed and really given the first credence in a long time that the best thing we could do as two white dudes was to sit back and listen. And we're not crazy enough to think we have a large audience, and we know that for a fact. But we also know that a way to sort of lead as an outlet is to go along with that. So we very much wanted to take the week off and listen and try to really just let other people talk. And that'll lead us kind of into talking a little bit about George Floyd and about the Black Lives Matter movement and things like that. We bill ourselves as sports and culture, so especially at a time like this, Justin, we can't not talk about what's going on in the wake of the Minneapolis murder of George Floyd at the hands of police officers, and the fallout of that, the peaceful protests, everything, I guess, people speaking out. And I think I want to start with why I think this is different for me and you. One, I think as teachers, we have a very different perspective on this. I think we inside the classroom, when you see children, I had a conversation with someone last week where I was a little bit upset with something that they had said on social media, and I told them that when I think about George Floyd and when I think about all those names go down the list, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor go down the list, I think of my students. I think of my 10-year-old students, and what are they growing up to become, and what are their chances, and what's going to affect them, what's going to stand in their way as they grow up in the United States of America. And so I think first, as a teacher, I was just really heartbroken and very upset that a human life would be treated like that. But then second of all, something that I think as a teacher you learn to do is to listen, and that communication is so important. And so that's what I'm committing to do, and I know Justin's doing that as well, is just listening. I and Justin both come from a very predominantly white area at the suburb of Cincinnati, which is pretty white to begin with, and in the Midwest as well. But I think regardless of where you grow up or where you live or what your experience is, now is a time to kind of check why is my initial response, what is my initial response, and why is it that way? So if you're thinking, why when I see the protests, right, but there's looting, yes, absolutely, that's evil, that should not be going on, absolutely, but that does not take away from the 99.9% of peaceful protests that are going on. And so why is my first instinct to think of self-protection? And I think that's where I've seen myself and a lot of people fall, is that when something like this happens and somebody else or another people group have the opportunity to be given more of a prominent voice and just actual space in the community and in the United States, that my first reaction is, how does that affect my standing? How does that affect how people view me? And I think especially at this time, what I'm really trying to learn and trying to lean into is just listening and trying to go back to, when I see something, when I hear something, why do I feel the way that I do, and why does it make me feel a certain way? And Justin, I want to have you jump in there.
Yeah, the biggest thing for me with all this is just don't believe everything or the first thing that you see on top of your Facebook feed or your Twitter feed or your Instagram feed or whatever feed you're looking at. Dig for yourself and do research for yourself and form your own opinion, because the problem is we've all followed a majority for too long, and we all have not had our own opinion, which is what puts us in the situation that we're in. And Nick and I don't have the same opinion, and it's not that's healthy, but we do feel like human lives are being taken for no good reason, and that is a problem. And so we don't want you to think that we're trying to make you see our opinion, but also we want you to see the root of the problem and form your own opinion from that. And so that's part of the reason why we took last week off, because like Nick said, we had to listen and we had to form our opinions on it. And as a man who comes from a family filled with law enforcement officers, it's been a hard couple of weeks for me to figuring out where I stand at on everything. But the one place I do stand is that human life has to be treated as valuable, and in every life, no matter what, has to be treated as valuable. And so, and right now, the people that are hurting and the people who need us to love them are the black people of our country. And so that's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm called to do, and that's what I'm going to do. So that's where I fall out on all of it. Nick, you said it very elegantly, and so I don't want to say too many words to take away from what you said, but that's my opinion on it.
Yeah, I think I go back to metaphors that really help me. I think sometimes when you try to put on somebody else's shoes or go through somebody else's circumstances, it's really hard to come out of it and not just think about how you would respond in your situation. But just thinking through, and this is an analogy that's been said for a long time. It's in a Macklemore song from a few years back, but it talks about like all houses matter, right? But right now there are certain houses that are on fire, and there are certain houses that aren't. And to show up as the firefighter squad and to, blow massive amounts of water onto a house that's not on fire just doesn't make sense right now. And by saying we need to put water on the house that's on fire is not by any means saying that the other houses don't matter. And I think what's really hard is that just when you're in the majority, like the two of us, it's just hard to see a different perspective, and it's hard to say, yes, I've gone through tough things and terrible things in these different circumstances, but I started 3 laps in to this race. It's a 4-lap race, and I started 3 laps in. That's a completely different ball game. And so I think I would just encourage anyone listening or watching to really just think through, one, what can I do to listen this week? What can I do to even put more black voices in front of me? I think that's what I learned that last week on Blackout Tuesday I have a lot of friends who were with the movement for Black Lives Matter, but I just don't consume a lot of Black lives on a daily basis through social media. And maybe that's something that you can do, is go follow some black people, some black voices, some black creators, things like that, leaders in social media, leaders in the world. And that way you start to, on a daily basis, see things differently. You start to hear different stories. And I think that's just a little step, but starting to listen and putting yourself in a place where you can continually listen, I think makes a big difference. And there's just one more thing I want to say, and then we'll move on to the sports aspect of this, Justin. But I think one thing that's really struck me as a Christ follower is the metaphor of this not being a mission trip moment, this not being a moment where for a week or two there's protests going on, and so I care about it, and I care about hashtag Black Lives Matter and those things, but then in 3 weeks from now, all I care about is my own life again. And so I think that's what's important, is making sure that I'm doing something as well as listening, but I'm actually taking action steps that put me in a place where 3 weeks from now, when potentially it's a little bit less in the news, which it may not be, but even if it is, at that point, I've already taken a few steps to make sure that I'm different than I was before George Floyd was murdered in Minnesota. So I think with those things said, as that continues to weigh heavy on our hearts in the United States, we've seen some sort of fallout in different sports, Justin. And you can start us there with Dabo Swinney, but your beloved Clemson coach has been involved in some things this week, and I think it's definitely worth discussing.
Yeah, before we jump into Dabo, just real quick, Atticus Finch says it best out of To Kill a Mockingbird, which our sophomores read every year, and I read when I was a sophomore, and I think every sophomore for a long time has read it. You can't know what a man goes through until you get in his skin. Atticus Finch is telling Scout that on their front porch in a book written a long time ago, and it still applies today. So that's, if anything else, Atticus has been a longtime figure in our country and for a lot of people. So there you go. Listen to Atticus Finch's words. So, yeah, my man Dabo is in the news again. We've talked about Dabo a lot on our podcast here. So he's in some hot water, Nick. Some players are saying assistant coach used some racial slurs towards some players. And then Dabo is walking around wearing a Football Matters shirt this week, which goes back to when we talked about him earlier about all the whole COVID thing and him downplaying that with We're America kind of thing. So it kind of plays into that. So Nick, where are you at on Dabo and all this thing, and what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I want to start with the shirt, the Football Matters shirt. I think at best it's really, really tone deaf, and I understand that I don't think the shirt is by any stretch a shot at the Black Lives Matter movement or even or at All Lives Matter at anything. But regardless, there's some sort of reading the room that needs to go on there. I think you're a person that's going to be photographed everywhere you go. That's just not a smart decision. But two, I think something that's really hit me this week is Dabo's a culture guy. And if it's really culture, then there's an issue in his culture. So if he's really developing a culture that's supposed to produce these young men into leaders and NFL stars, then I think he needs to change the culture. And I think he needs to be willing to say, I was wrong. Maybe I didn't get the full story a few years ago when this happened with a player. And I think what's interesting here is that I think you see sometimes the player and the assistant coach kind of made up, and they were like, okay, we're going to move on. But I don't think that should change the way that the head coach responds. I think the head coach is still responsible, and I mean, you can go back and look at NCAA violations at my school, and you can look at that and see the coach is responsible at some point. But I don't understand with Dabo right now, because to me he's just coming off really tone deaf, and it's making me trust him less and less.
Yeah, as a coach, as somebody who knows a lot of head coaches, not at the scale of Dabo, but still, my personal belief is you always have to hold your assistant coaches more accountable than you hold your players. And if your players don't see that, then what is going to make them believe that they need to be held accountable? And so that's something that kind of, I don't know, made me sad, made me upset about Dabo, just because of what he says and what he preaches and all that kind of stuff. And if that happens, obviously, programs and stuff, a lot of times more in football than other sports, take care of reconciliation inside the four walls there, which has ran into problems before this, not just for Clemson, but for a lot of different programs, a lot of different teams. It's something that seems to go with the football culture, the locker room, all that kind of stuff, which I get it. But today's a different day and age than what it was a long time ago when the locker room was made. And so stuff that happens, it can get fixed inside. But how many times is a player going to look at a coach and tell them, I don't accept your apology, kind of thing? That's a hard place for a player to be. And so luckily, I've never had to be there. But I could just think as a player how hard that would be to look at an assistant coach and say, no, I don't accept your apology. And so that's something that we definitely have to look at more, is making sure coaches are held accountable if we're going to hold players accountable to a high standard thing there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a structure of power there, like you're talking about as a player. What if you say something to the assistant coach? What if you say something to Dabo? You might lose playing time. You might lose your spot. At the end of the day, we'd like to think it doesn't boil down to that. But it reminds me of what we've talked about with the COVID-19, right? We're going to play football, and it's because of money. It is what it is, right? Whether or not it's healthy to play football, we're going to play football. And so that's kind of where I go here is, there's a next man up. Like, you can ride the bench, especially at a program like Clemson, 4 or 5 star behind you in most positions, if not 2 behind you. We don't need you, son. Like, we've got 80 guys, And so I think that's what's really hard. And I don't know, it's just really hard for me because I think Dabo says a lot of things that I like, but your actions and especially what your players say about you, your students say about you, same thing. It tells me a lot more. That's who I'm going to ask. I'm not going to ask, parents or well, in this case, parents in the classroom is what I'm thinking. But I would ask the students. That's what I would ask. I'd ask the students their honest opinion. That tells me everything. And so I think I would like to hear more Clemson players speak out and given the platform to do that. But I don't know. That kind of reminds me of the Iowa situation with Coach Ferentz, and now players are allowed to be on social media for the first time. And I don't know. That really sent me for a loop hearing that, Justin, of there's some some allegations of their strength coach. She's the highest paid strength coach in the nation, is my understanding. Makes $750,000 a year. Been there for over 20 years. And now players left and right are saying, hey, he's treated me this way. He's called me these slurs. And just now, current players are given a platform to speak about it. I just don't know what to do with that.
Well, it's kind of like the Me Too movement. You know what I mean? Like, so many people are like, well, if this had really happened, you would have spoke out 20 years ago. Like, no, that takes courage, and that takes bravery, and it takes a lot of self-love, I guess is what you could say, to speak out in those ways. And same with these players. Like, it's hard to be a player in the moment and say those things with a guy that's so well respected, not only at Iowa but in the profession. And so when that first player has the bravery to step out and say that, it makes it easier for the next guy and the next guy and the next guy. And so that's something that we have to understand, is that just because it didn't come out 20 years ago doesn't mean they didn't happen. It just means it's really hard for people to step out and say those things against somebody who's so well respected. And so, speaking of somebody who is bucking the system a little bit, Bubba Wallace in NASCAR. Wow, is all I can say first off. But the things that are happening in that sport, yes, it's a sport. Even though I watched it last night for about 5 laps and about fell asleep. But, the amazing things that he's doing there, the car that he drove, the video that him and Jimmy Johnson and all those guys made, and really taking a stand against, in NASCAR itself, taking a stand against something that's really strong in the sport. Look, the sport is mostly done in the South. It is what it is. It's mostly done in the South. That's NASCAR. They can drive there year round, not have to worry about weather, not have to worry about any of that. And so taking a stand against what they have and doing those things is extremely brave and extremely not towards money, is what I would say, which is something we don't see from a lot of sports. And so, Nick, what's your thoughts on what's going on in NASCAR right now?
Yeah, I think I'm just amazed. Bubba shares what he's going to have, what his car's design is going to look like, his paint job's going to look like. He basically calls NASCAR to respond, and a day later they ban Confederate flags at all events. And I think it just reminds me of, as a social studies teacher, as someone who's trying to learn more about our past to inform our future, that just because something has existed doesn't mean it was ever correct, or that it was ever okay, or that it was ever moral. And I think you're seeing this with, statues in certain places of Confederate generals and things like that. And you can get into a whole other argument about, why we would have statues of people who lost. And that's a different argument.
I was going to say, I have been against Confederate flag and all that stuff for a long time. And I won't bore everybody on here, but my own personal beliefs on all that is the same as we don't ever glorify losers in this country, yet we do it there. But if you ever want to reach out to me and ask me about that or talk about that, more than welcome. At Clemens10 on Twitter. Reach out whenever you want. My direct messages are open. So that's Nick. Sorry, I'll give it back to you.
No, absolutely. I guess what I'm seeing, and I think with our generation and the generation already behind us, it's a little different. And we're willing to come with an open hand and say, okay, what's the truth? Let's learn more about it. Let's find out the truth. Then let's make a decision. And I personally, in several areas of my life, don't want to be in a position 40 years down the road where, because I believed this when I was 20, this must be the truth, or this must be the way we must do this as a society. And so I think, especially in this area, good on NASCAR. That's absolutely brave. Fantastic. It's the right thing to do, and they're doing it. And it's going to cost them money, and it's probably going to cost them sponsorship. It's going to cost them potentially future drivers, fans for sure. But I think they're going to see some other companies probably step up and increase their sponsorship of the NASCAR brand, I would think, in support. But I think it's very brave of them. But I think it just like I was saying, just because it's been there doesn't mean it's the right thing. And so I think this is a great example of realizing it. A moment has happened in the United States where it's a time to reevaluate certain things, and it helps us to look at it in a fresh perspective. This is a great example of that. Good job, NASCAR.
Absolutely. So NASCAR's back. They've been back. And so speaking of sports that are coming back, we'll move into the sports side of things here. So if I had a roast of the week and a funniest thing of the week, I would give them both to baseball. Because baseball, here's your chance to play. The NBA is not coming back until July 31st. NASCAR is a niche sport. PGA is a niche sport. MLS is a niche sport right now in this country. Major League Baseball, everybody I know has a team. Even if they don't watch it, they have a team that they watch, and they actively keep up with them. And MLB is just dropping the ball, is what I'll say, on coming back and on doing those things. And look, I'll be the first to say it. I am all for players getting their money. These guys put their bodies on the line and all this stuff for our enjoyment. And so I will not yell at the players for that, because if they want to get their money and they want to get all these benefits that they deserve, then they should fight for that. But the fact that Major League Baseball can't figure out how to get a season is crazy to me.
Absolutely.
Crazy.
Absolutely. I think it just shows you like how unwilling both sides are, you know. And I think you're right. I think the players deserve to be paid. One, I think the players do want to play too, but they're also savvy enough to know that they're in a situation that's unlike any other, and a season won't happen like this again. And so they're going to wait until they get what they want. And you know what? Kudos to them. I think that's what they should do. They're professional athletes. It's their career. It's your family. I mean, I think you jump over to talking about the MLS, Justin. The MLS comes up with a really cool, from the onset, design tourney of 26 teams, playing at the Disney complex in Orlando. But then you think about it, I was talking to my brother-in-law yesterday about it, and he said, well, what about the families, right? If we're going to quarantine our teams, then that means the families are going to be without their players for 6 weeks. So from the business standpoint, from the viewership standpoint on TV, great. Love it. They're going to play a bunch of soccer games. It's going to be like a mini World Cup. But from a personal, as a player, as a family member standpoint, I don't think it's going to be nearly as great. And I think that maybe that's something that the MLB players are thinking through, is how can we do this in the best way, not just to make our money, but to make sure that we're done well too as well.
The frustrating thing is, too, this is the year that the Reds were actually going to be good again, and we can't make this happen. Like, that's just frustrating to me.
We're not going to be able to win 60 games any way you cut it at this point. So.
Correct. So college football, some of them came back to campus last week. We know Louisville did. I know Alabama did. Notre Dame's coming back soon. You know, some of the schools, probably a lot of them are back now. And with that being said, players are coming back and testing positive asymptomatically, which, depending on the study you read right now, it makes your opinion of that. But they're testing positive, and I don't know what every school's guidelines are on positive tests, but what are your thoughts on all these players coming back, getting college football players back, and them testing positive, and how that should be approached, and how it is being approached, and how it affects college football?
I think I'm for 100% accountability in this area, too. I think that's just going to be my word for the week, is accountability. And I love to just kind of pop around, and I'll come back to it, but the PGA today released that every single player and every single caddy at Colonial this weekend tested negative. 100%. They just released everybody. Now, would they have done that if they were positive? Probably not. They would have done it differently as a PR move. But my point is, universities, football programs need to be very transparent, very upfront. These amount of players have it this week. Here's what we're going to do to fix the problem. Here's what we're going to do in response. Now, I'm not asking for you to say Trevor Lawrence, quarterback, Clemson, has COVID-19. I don't want an alert every 5 minutes. And I don't think there's a lot of laws there that wouldn't
HIPAA.
work with that. Yeah, HIPAA would be all over that. But there needs to be transparency, because, and I heard this on another podcast this week, it's one thing when it's right now, Justin, and it's preseason, but when it's the Iron Bowl week, is Alabama going to actually change their protocol, or Auburn going to actually change the protocol if they have a few players test positive? If the quarterback, if Bo Nix for Auburn tests positive Iron Bowl week and he's been fine all year, Are they really going to tell anybody? Is it really going to change that? And so I think it really makes me think, is this another thing where we're going to say one thing, it's lip service, and then in reality we're going to do another thing behind closed doors?
I think it's everything that college football is. As much as we love it, that's what it is. I mean, look at the Reggie Bush thing. He gets to come back because they found a loophole in it where after 10 years, the whatchamacallit runs out for him not being associated with USC. And so now they get to bring him back, and with him, they're going to make a bunch of money because it's one of the best players in USC history. And so all that kind of stuff. So if there's a way to find it, they're going to find it, and they're going to figure out how to get around it and all those kind of things. And this situation is no different, in my opinion. And you brought it up. Our sport's back, Nick. PGA is back. Our guy Jordy is on the course right now as we speak. He hit a 96-yard shot to about 4 feet before I got on here, which got me excited. But how great is it to have pro golf back?
I mean, it's fantastic, and I think you saw it a couple weeks ago. There were a couple different events that they did, the tailor-made special to raise money for COVID-19 relief, as well as the Phil Tiger rematch from last year with Peyton and Brady rolled in there for fun. You see guys that are understanding the moment, and you see guys that are saying, like you see the amount of players at Colonial this week. Normally you don't see anything like this at this event. This is usually kind of an off event. It's not, it's not on the major list. It's not on Tiger's list, those kind of things. But you're seeing much more guys understand the moment, understand the opportunity to play a sport. Again, you're seeing players take the opportunity to speak out. One of the things that the PGA did this week, or I guess CBS did this week, is they set up this kind of camera on the range, and players and caddies can just walk up and do a little 30-second soundbite and say whatever they want, and then they'll air it. And already several guys have used it as an opportunity to thank frontline workers, to thank police officers, to encourage people who are protesting, to encourage the Black Lives Matter movement. And so I think I've seen it, at least initially, as one, a great thing to watch. And yes, I understand that some people struggle to watch golf, but right now I'm taking anything. And two, I think it's a great opportunity for athletes, even like Bubba Wallace in NASCAR, to reevaluate how can I use the platform that I have when we go back to sports. And I think you're seeing that, and that's encouraging to me, because I think, and that goes back to the Dabo Swinney thing, something that really invigorates people who are tone deaf is when somebody of high prominence, like a football coach, gives it no space. And so I think that's why I'm encouraged by what's going on with the PGA players.
Yeah, I just like having something entertaining that I personally like seeing on TV back, and so that's exciting for me. So we know we took you a little different angle today, but the moment required that, and if we hadn't said anything, then that would be tone deaf on our part, speaking of tone deaf. And so we encourage you to, like I said earlier, gather your own opinion, look up things, do some digging yourself, make sure that you come up with things yourself, and as a country, we have to get better. I think that's what we can all agree on. We have to get better, no matter what. So Nick, any closing thoughts on anything?
Yeah, I think everything that you said, I just want to echo, and I think, as usual, during this crazy season of COVID-19, as well as what's going on with social and racial injustice and just unrest in the country, be with those that are your family. Love on people well. Listen. Take the time to just listen. And like Justin said, feel free to reach out to people who don't agree with you. We are both included in that. Personally, would love to have conversations with you about why we've gone to where we've gone, why we think the way we do now, and maybe even why we're reacting differently than we did a few years ago to things like this. But I think it's super important to love people well, love people in your circle well, but allow yourself the space to think differently, to be in the shoes of somebody who thinks differently than you, and to just be open about being wrong. And I think the most dangerous thing you can do at any point in your life and in any space is to not allow yourself to be wrong. Yep. With that said, thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you back on the bricks next time.
Thank you for listening to the Back to the Bricks podcast.
We'd love for you to leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts, send this podcast to a friend, or share this episode on your Instagram story.
We'll see you back on the bricks next time.